Tribal communities before the British rule. Before the arrival of the British, tribal groups in India had adopted different kinds of subsistence strategies. These are briefly described below. A number of tribal communities, such as the Khons of Odisha, lived by hunting and gathering forest produce. Some of them also sold forest produce, such as kusum and palash flowers, to local weavers and leather workers, who required these to color cloth and leather. They also extracted oil from the seeds of sal and mahua trees and exchanged this for rice and grains that were not produced in the forests, with traders or neighboring settled agriculturists. Many tribal groups, such as Van Gujars of the Punjab hills and the Lambades of Andhra Pradesh, were pastoralists. They lived by herding and rearing animals. These people lived on the outskirts of forests and maintained their existence exclusively by the sale of milk, ghee, and other produce of their herds. Some tribal groups settled down at one place. Gradually, they got the ownership rights to the land they had cultivated for some years. In many cases, the land belonged to the clan as a whole. All members of the clan were regarded as descendants of an original ancestor. Towards the beginning of the 19th century, the various tribal groups who lived in hilly forested tracts started practicing agriculture. They practiced what is called shifting agriculture. That is, once the crop was ready and harvested, they moved on to another patch of land. A field that had been cultivated once was left fallow for several years, and the natural vegetation was allowed to regrow. As supplies from the forest produce dwindled, some tribal people started carrying loads or working as laborers in the fields of settled agriculturists. Impact of colonial rule on tribal life. Prior to the colonial rule, the tribal societies had lived in relative isolation for hundreds of years. Colonial rule threw a deep impact on the tribal societies of India. As the colonial rule expanded, the social and cultural life of these people underwent several changes. Many previously unadministered tribal areas were brought under the control of the British. Outsiders who had not been keen to go into these areas previously could do so under the protection of the colonial state. With commercialization of land, expansion of cultivation, and demand for cash revenues, outsiders settled down in tribal areas. As a result, large tracts of tribal land were transferred to non-tribal outsiders. The tribal people were practically deprived of all rights. While in principle, the colonial state followed a policy of non-intervention in tribal matters, the colonial laws and rules worked against such benevolent desires. Administration of tribal areas. The British allowed tribal chiefs to continue enjoying their land titles over a group of villages, but they were told to administer these under British control and supervision, and according to British laws in India. British land revenue rules, British police regulations, British forest laws, etc. came to govern tribal areas as well. Thus, the tribal chiefs lost much of the authority which they had earlier enjoyed. Land settlement. To ensure additional and regular supply of money from the tribal areas, the British introduced land settlement. So they forced the tribes who practiced shifting agriculture to settle down at one place so that land under cultivation could be measured and revenue could be fixed. The tribal groups who practiced shifting agriculture, especially those living in northeast India, protested as they found it difficult to stick to settled cultivation in hilly areas where water is scarce and land is dry. The system of cash economy. The colonial rule introduced cash economy in the tribal areas. As a result, groups of merchants, middlemen, and moneylenders settled down in tribal areas. They were called Tikus, which meant aliens or outsiders. The British also introduced plantation agriculture to ensure regular supply of raw materials for their industries in England. They forcibly acquired large tracts of agricultural and previously forested lands from tribal groups and weakened their economy. The poor and landless people of the tribal communities had to work as laborers on these lands where they were paid low wages. They often had to take money from the moneylenders at a high rate of interest. Thus, their condition became miserable. British forest laws. By the mid-19th century, the British had passed a number of forest acts. Some forests, which produced commercially valuable timber like deodar or sal, were declared reserved forests. No one was allowed access to these forests. Other forests were classified as protected forests. In these forests, some customary rights were given to the tribal people. There were severe punishments and huge fines who violated these rules or overstayed in the forests. Thus, many tribal people were forced to migrate to other areas in search of work and livelihood. Those who worked on the plantations of indigo, tea, etc. were paid miserably low wages. Tribal responses. Throughout the 19th century, many tribal groups across India rose in armed revolt against their immediate oppressors, such as landlords, outsiders and moneylenders, and also against the ultimate oppressors, the British government and officials. The main features of these tribal revolts are: these revolts were autonomous and in rare cases enjoyed the support of other groups of society, especially the educated middle classes. Most of the revolts were rooted in the tribal belief system and had a strong religious sanction. However, in most cases, violence was the last resort of the tribals and used only when the other methods, such as appeals and petitions, did not work. Unfortunately, the British officers often recorded only the violent bits of the revolt, and that is why most of them look so violent today. Most of the revolts were ruthlessly suppressed, although post the revolts the British made some efforts to accommodate the demands and protect the tribals from excess of outsiders and market forces. Santhal revolt. The Santhals inhabited some parts of the Chota Nagpur plateau, Bengal and Bihar. The Santhal rebellion was as much against the British police and revenue officials as it was against the oppression of outsiders like the zamindars and moneylenders who were known as Dikus. Under the leadership of two brothers, Sidhu and Kanhu, they met in large numbers in June 1855. They cut off postal and railway communications between Bhagalpur and Rajmahal and were in complete control of this area. Armed with swords and poisoned arrows, they attacked every outlying European bungalow and killed some British railway and police officials. The Santhals mainly used the tactics of guerrilla warfare. The authorities were taken by surprise and panic-stricken people fled by the thousands. When the rebels were pursued by the British forces, they took shelter in the thick jungles. Till February 1856, they showed no signs of submission and were openly at war with the British. Finally, the British authorities launched a military campaign against the Santhals and crushed them. Their leaders were arrested and the movement came to an end. The Mundas and Birsa. The Munda rebellion was one of the most important tribal uprisings that took place during the British rule in India. The Mundas inhabited the region around Ranchi. They traditionally enjoyed a preferential rent rate as the Khunkaltidar, or the original clearer of the forests. However, during the 19th century, under the British rule, many non-tribal Jagirdars and Zamindars migrated to traditional tribal areas and grabbed the land owned by the tribal groups. In due course, the tribals were compelled to work as laborers under non-tribal, exploitative people. This system was locally called Bait Begari, or forced labor. In the last decade of the 19th century, as the monsoons failed, the situation became worse. Faced with starvation and epidemics, the Mundas rose in rebellion against the British. They were led by Birsa Munda. The rebellion aimed to drive away the British and establish Munda Raj. This rebellion came to be called Ulugan. Birsa was born in the mid-1870s. As an adolescent, Birsa heard tales of a Munda golden age when the Mundas had been free of the oppression of the Dikus, outsiders. He heard people talking of the need to organize a revolt against the Dikus to regain their land and kingdom. He really wanted to help the people in their endeavor. Birsa joined a German missionary but did not find solace there. He reverted to the original Munda faith of his ancestors and spent some time in the company of a Vaishnava preacher. He was influenced by the Hindu ideas of purity and piety. He decided to reform his tribal society. He was hardly 21 years old when, in 1895, he started a new faith. He urged people to give up drinking liquor and to stop believing in witchcraft. His disciples grew in number. To them he appeared as a new prophet, an incarnation of God who possessed various supernatural powers. They referred to him as Birsa Bhagwan. The popularity of Birsa Munda alarmed the British government. Who worried the British officials most was the political aim of Birsa to drive out the missionaries, Hindu landlords, moneylenders and the British government and re-establish the golden age of Munda rule. The British authorities arrested him and convicted him on charges of rioting and jailed him for 2 years. After a tough resistance of the Mundas, the British had to release him in 1897. Soon after his release, Birsa Munda renewed his old activities. He began touring villages to gather support. Birsa started organizing a fighting force by imparting training to the tribal youth in the use of bows, arrows and the sword. He encouraged people to fight against those who were perpetrating injuries and oppression upon them in one way or the other. He advised the Munda farmers not to pay rent to the zamindars. The entire Munda community joined together and attacked mission houses, British settlements and many police stations and killed constables. They raised the white flag as a symbol of Birsa Raj. A hunt was organized to capture Birsa. He evaded arrest for the time, but due to betrayal of some Mundas, he was captured in February 1900. He was put in jail, where he died. The Munda rebellion led to the enactment of the Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act of 1908. This act tried to help the Mundas by banning Bait Begari. The act assured local customary land rights to the Mundas in their villages. The government also initiated several steps to bring the tribals and the administration closer to each other. Government officials were now stationed closer to the Munda villages so that they could speedily attend to the grievances of the tribals. The movement showed that the tribal people had the capacity to protest against the injustices inflicted by the British government. The rebellion also contributed to the governing socio-religious consciousness among the tribals in Chota Nagpur. Birsa Munda came to be increasingly identified with the aspirations of the tribals. Some people began to consider him divine and began to worship him. The Munda rebellion also inspired many other smaller socio-religious movements in the region. Northeast, the Khasi revolt. The interference of the British agents and Christian missionaries increased in the northeast region of India between 1826 to 1904. This made the native inhabitants of the region suspicious of British intentions. The Khasis were a prominent tribe who occupied the hilly region between the Jantia hills. They resented the coming of outsiders into their territories, including the Europeans and the Bengal contractors. They even objected to the posting of the British troops at the village of Nonclaw. The Khasis rose in rebellion under the leadership of U. Tirot Singh. When there was a proposal of constructing a road passing through their area, joining Sylhet with Burma, the Khasi chiefs wanted to drive away the strangers from their territory. On 5th May 1829, a strong party of the Khasis, aided by the Garos, another tribe, massacred a large number of Europeans and Bengalis who were working under them. This incident marked the beginning of their revolt against the British. Thereafter, they burnt the European settlements, released the convicts employed in the construction of the road, and marched towards Cherrapunji in search of Mr. Scott, the political agent of Assam. The widespread unrest caused much panic among the British officials, and they had a tough time dealing with the Khasis. Eventually, the British took resort to burning the Khasi villages and forced the Khasis to surrender. The revolt lasted for around 4 years, 1829 to 33.